Imran Ahmed is the founder and CEO of the Center for Countering Digital Hate, US UK, specializing in identity based hate, extremism, disinformation, and conspiracy theories on social media. A recognized media expert and documentary contributor, Imran analyzes how bad actors exploit digital platforms and advises politicians globally on related policy and legislation. He holds an MA in social and political sciences from Cambridge University. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's really my pleasure to be here with you.
So I want to start with sort of the basics on this topic, which is what is called the negativity bias. So can you explain the negativity bias and how social media exploits our primal instincts to pay more attention to harmful stimuli?
Yeah, I mean, look, social media first of all, it's run by companies, and those companies want to maximize revenues. That's what all companies want to do. They want to maximize their profitability. They want to create shareholder value. And they create shareholder value by showing people ads. So what they do is try and select content from the pool of content that's generated by the billions of users to show to people that makes them more likely to stay there for one extra scroll, one extra click, a few more minutes. And every second that they spend on those platforms is a monetizable opportunity. And what those platforms have engineered their platforms to do, and what they've got data on from trillions of clicks made by billions of people all over the world, is they've worked out what makes us spend the most time on those platforms. Fundamentally, they're designed to be addictive. They maximize profits by triggering emotional, dopamine-driven responses like fear, anger, and envy.
Mm-hmm.
It's essentially the stimulation of the sympathetic nervous system. So that's part of the autonomic nervous system in our cerebrovascular system, which is responsible for fight or flight.
Yeah.
And sometimes these things all sound so scientific. I mean, I went to med schools before I studied politics at Cambridge. I went to med school at University College London, and sometimes these words all are designed in a way that makes it sound official and scientific, but people don't really know what they mean. So the way I describe it to my friends and my family is, what wakes you up at night and keeps you awake? So when I wake up at night and I see my daughter lying in bed with me, I stay awake for a few seconds. I want to look at her. I smile. I feel happy. Content. The world is good. And I go back to sleep eventually. If I woke up and I heard banging downstairs, I was fearful. I was angry that someone's in my space. I'm scared that someone might hurt me and my children. That's when the sympathetic nervous system gets into gear. It is that sense of anxiety. And there's also, when you have those nagging concerns, money problems or relationship problems, and you wake up at 2:00 in the morning and you start remembering them, and then it's 4:00 and you still can't get back to sleep. Yeah. So it's cortisol and adrenaline. Mm-hmm. Really keep you addicted to those platforms, because what they want you to do is to be watching for as long as possible. And because the algorithms reward engagement, they reward that, the content that keeps people on the platform. It actually means that the most harmful content, the stuff that basically scares the socks off us, is the stuff that's rewarded with the most amplification, because it exploits our fear and outrage, anger and stress. And that's the stuff that we see most frequently. In one respect, social media negativity bias means that our timeline is basically our own personal hell.
Yeah, that's so true. Oh my gosh. I love because you're right. I sometimes feel when I talk about these things that it's going over people's heads, but I love what wakes you up, because it's so true when you think about it that way. One thing I'll add to this, because in our curriculum, we talk a lot about evolution and how technologies evolve faster than the human mind, and how these engineers are sort of exploiting our primal instincts. And negativity bias was actually a good thing when we were hunter gatherers, right? The cavemen that paid attention to the negative signals best were the ones that survived, right? Whether it was, I don't know, a lion roaring or just danger, right? So we're wired to do this, right? And these companies are exploiting, just like with the dopamine loop that you talked about too, our primal instincts. And whether it was intentional going in or not, I don't know, but that is what we get, is we pay more attention to that stuff and we linger on it longer. And that's just because of our primal instincts. So I don't know if you've heard that piece, but I also think that's a really interesting way of framing it for people that don't understand the complexity of the science.
Yeah, and that's it. That's something that you understand, and some of those people who I would hope are legislators. Although I spend a lot of time with lawmakers, and I'm not that convinced that they fully understand.
Yeah.
But certainly the technology companies themselves, the social media platforms themselves, hey, they absolutely get it.
Yeah.
At Stanford University, which is of course in the heart of Silicon Valley, and is where so many of the most famous engineers and the entrepreneurs who have made tons of money from tech, where they studied. At Stanford, there is something called the Persuasive Technology Laboratory, where they meld neuroscience, psychology, social psychology, anthropology, politics, sociology, everything all into one new field, which is basically about addiction. And it's saying we could make a ton of money if we work out how to master addiction. You don't need to shovel nicotine into someone or shovel opioids into someone. If you can just manipulate their mind and basically keep them in a stupor watching something while you're monetizing every blink, every second that they spend on that.
Yeah. Is that the one Tristan Harris talks about this, right? Is that the one he went through, the persuasive technology
I don't know
program?
if you, but there's a few fantastic books that came out of there very early on where they're really explicit and they're like, hey guys, we've worked out a way to addict everyone and we're going to.
Oh my gosh.
I have read those books.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk about harmful content a little bit. So it's widely documented that kids and teens are actually recommended harmful content without even seeking this out. We always try to explain to parents, like, your feed is very different than your kid's feed, right? So can you explain how this works and maybe what parents can look out for if they allow their kids on social media?
So this is a remarkably complicated question in one respect, because one of the biggest myths that we've had to help people to get over is the idea that social media just gives you more of what you like.
Right.
And it can mean that kids are kind of ashamed of what they see, because kids get told this by their parents. They get told, be careful about what you see because you'll see lots more of it. And kids are really ashamed then, because they can think, well, was I maybe looking at something that was bad because my feed is flooded with eating disorder content, pornography, violence, self-harm, and they think it's their fault. That's not true. Social media gives you more of what they want you to want. They give you the stuff that they know is most likely to addict someone with your general demographics, your age, your location, your various different factors in your, but also your psychographics, your psychology, and they're constantly studying that. Why are they studying it? Because they sell that data to advertisers as well. It's a real money maker for them. They can use all that insight into us as people to monetize, to make sure that we have the best feeds possible to addict us, but also they can sell it to advertisers by saying this person has these vulnerabilities in their psychology. You might want to target them in this way. So what we've found when we look at what do platforms want to give to kids, we've got to find, platforms don't tell us all this stuff. We have to go and experiment and work out what we think is happening by looking at experimental results. Let me give you one example. We did a study called Deadly by Design.
Mhm.
We opened accounts in 4 different countries: the US, the UK, my home country, Canada, and Australia.
Mhm.
And we opened them. All we told TikTok was, we're a 13-year-old girl. Our name is Susan.
Yep.
And then we recorded the first half hour of the For You page, which is the main page on TikTok.
Yeah.
It's where the algorithm starts feeding you content. And what we found was that within 2.6 minutes of opening an account as a 13-year-old girl in these 4 countries, within 2.6 minutes, it was giving those accounts self-harm content.
Mhm.
8 minutes, eating disorder content. On average, in that first half hour, every 39 seconds, it was serving up something that could be psychologically damaging to those children. And here's the most disturbing and pernicious finding. When we renamed half the accounts Susan Lose Weight, those are, so to sort of show that this kid's vulnerable. Now, and you go, if you or I met a young girl who was showing extreme distress and body dysmorphia, our response would be, okay, I've got to be careful here. This kid's vulnerable. I've got to make sure that I act in the most cautious, loving, kind way possible and try and help, not hurt. Not TikTok. TikTok actually gave those accounts 12 times as much self-harm content. So they recognize vulnerability and they exploit it.
Yeah.
So they, one of the things that we've also found in other results is that they latch on to any brief engagement and they serve more extreme versions of it. So
Yep.
let's say a kid stops on a bikini picture. Very soon they'll be getting more explicit pornography. They'll be getting more extreme content. And then it spirals from there. So they're constantly being taken up the value chain as these social media companies see it. Now, what can we do as parents? It's something my wife and I talk about all the time. And I know that all parents do. It doesn't matter how powerful you are, how smart you are, if you are the CEO of an organization that studies this for a living, it is still incredibly difficult to try and be a parent to this amazing creature who you wish you could help in every single way, be their 100% guide through life, but you realize that all you can do is give them the general guidance and get them to where they will end up deciding to go. And one of the most fundamental challenges for us as parents is that we don't actually share the experience of being on social media with our kids, because social media is inherently an individual, lonely, on your bed, on the sofa, on the phone, not looking at other people, not sharing that experience with anyone else. Moment in kids' lives. So the first step is talk to your kids, ask them what they're seeing, and ask them what they're seeing most frequently. Tell them that there's no shame involved in what they see, but help them to contextualize it. So it's an exchange of information, a symmetrical exchange of information. They're teaching us about what they see, and we're teaching them about whether or not it's real or it's normal, or some context that helps them to understand that a 500 calorie a day diet will actually kill you. And it won't give you the body that you want, if which is what you could be encouraged to believe if you're on social media all the time. And parents should also be looking out for warning signs like sudden mood changes, withdrawal, or secrecy. But I think it all starts with that fundamental first understanding, which is that social media is algorithmically pushed. It's not deliberately sought by any child. We can't blame them for it. All we can do is help them to navigate a world that exists, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, there was so much there in that answer. One thing that came to mind when you were started talking about this is, and this is something we teach the older kids, social media does not show us what we actually like. It actually shows us things we can't look away from, right? So you said this, but this is kind of a way that we try to say it in a very succinct way, right? And again, those things tend to unfortunately be more harmful for some of the reasons we talked about. You mentioned the experiments, and I know your group has done these. these have been widely documented. I mean, Wall Street Journal has done them. So many other orgs have done them. When you were talking about creating a fresh account and what would come through on those if you just give them very little information, but primarily the age, right? This is so, I mean, this is so consistent. I've actually never seen an example where somebody ran an experiment and they didn't get harmful content right away, whether like you describe with the girls and the body image, or the boys and toxic masculinity. I mean, we're going to talk about that later. I'd love to ask you about that. But that is huge, because I think so many parents think, well, I'm on Instagram or whatever. Let's just use that as an example. Mine's fine. It's just cooking stuff and I'll see dog things, whatever. But Instagram knows, that you're not a 13, 14, 15-year-old kid. They know that you're an adult, and you're going to get less of that. And I just don't think parents understand this. And I also think it's just too big for any parent to oversee. And that's my thesis. Like you touched on this a little bit. It's like, yes, you can have the conversations, but at the end of the day, kids can have multiple accounts, right? That you might not even know about. And even if you feel like you have a great connection with your kid, which, hopefully most parents do, I would argue that many kids wouldn't tell their parents, even if they have a close relationship. And this is just anecdotally, I've just seen this so much. I think they don't understand what they're seeing. I think they're ashamed of what they're seeing. And I think they think their parents just don't understand, right? Because they're not in the generation. So those are just some of the things I wanted to throw in there. But it's just, I mean, Mark Zuckerberg, I'm sure you saw this. This just came out again. He's saying 18 for his kids. Did you see this? That's what he's going to, yeah. I think this just came out this week where, and we know this, many of the other tech leaders say the same thing. They limit their tech. We know they send them to Waldorf schools when they're young. But he's saying for his own platform, 18. So, yeah.
I mean, it is extraordinary to me that these platforms, and Mark Zuckerberg aside, I think to myself of the people who run TikTok, who run YouTube. We did a study recently. YouTube tells everyone that they never recommend eating disorder content to kids. We did an experiment recently where we found that 700 times out of 1,000, when we modeled a new account for a 13-year-old girl watching a video about disordered eating, 700 times out of 1,000, it actually fed them back eating disorder content or self-harm content. And the man who runs YouTube, Neil Mohan, he's South Asian, like I'm Afghan, but I think he's Indian origin. He has girls, he has children, young girls. And I wrote to him with the results of our research, just saying, like, we're not so dissimilar.
Yeah.
How on earth can you think we would never want this for our daughters? How on earth can you think this is okay to do to other people's children?
Yeah.
And then to lie to their parents and tell them, don't worry, you're safe on my platform. And there is I think one of the hardest things to accept is that there are people who care so little about us, who care so little about other people's children that they're willing to exploit them for a couple of $100 per child, because that's what they're worth. In the end, they're economic units to social media platforms.
Yeah, Instagram said $270 is the value of a teen user. Yeah.
My children are worth a lot more than $270.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I find their position to be morally unconscionable and frankly inexplicable, because I don't know anyone that I wonder sometimes, how were they raised? Who taught them that it was okay to sacrifice other people's kids so you can make an extra $270? What a tawdry way to live your life.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy. So you talked about a minute ago, you were talking about the individualized experience. So I want to push on that a little bit. Social media content is completely personalized to each individual on the planet. And that is a crazy thing to say when we say that out loud. You're not one person has the same feed, basically, or the same experience. So this is a big question, I think, but what effect do you think this has on humanity?
So I think there's a number of different intersecting things here. First of all, you've got personalized feeds. Second of all, you've got the fact that disinformation, hate actually get more engagement because of
Yeah.
the things that we talked about at the top of this podcast. And they get amplified more. So actually you get this topsy-turvy world, which is the opposite of the world that you and I grew up in which good information was selected and presented to us, and we were taught, we were educated, we were given the best possible understanding of the world around us. You know, for me to get to both med school and to study politics at Cambridge, believe me, someone had to teach me pretty well about the fact, the rules of the laws of physics, the
Mhm.
way that biology works, the way that chemistry works, the way that that our English language is constructed and used to communicate effectively, and a huge array of things. Now kids are basically being given the lies, the BS more than they are the truth, the reality. And so for teens who are still, they're developing their identity, their values, they don't necessarily have a rich array of previous experiences and information to judge new information against. This hyper curated reality can really distort their norms and beliefs.
Yeah.
It can normalize harmful behavior or values like toxic masculinity or body
Yeah.
shaming that they wouldn't have learned in other ways. And I think more fundamentally, because it fragments public discourse and it drives people into these isolated, lonely, algorithmic echo chambers that skew their perception and harm their mental well-being, it's having this large-scale effect on our society. I, I started CCDH after my colleague Jo Cox, who was a 41-year-old mother of two and a member of parliament for Batley and Spen in the northwest of England, which is where I come from. She was shot, stabbed, and beaten to death by a terrorist who'd been radicalized online during the Brexit referendum in 2015.
Mhm.
And it shattered my understanding of reality. 2016, sorry. It shattered my understanding of reality because I understood that um, first of all, that these online spaces that we just thought were for fun could actually really alter someone's perceptions to such an extent that he would think it would be acceptable to murder an innocent. She was tiny as well, a tiny little woman for no good reason.
Yeah.
And I understood that what happened is that because digital spaces had become the main place where we share information, where we negotiate our values, our norms, even what we believe to be true, and because they operated to different rules to the real world, that they had the potential to re-socialize our society. I was worried about extremism, but now what I'm more worried about is isolation, loneliness, and the
Yeah.
fact that we no longer trust each other, because that is more dangerous to our democracy and to our society, which by definition is about how we come together to produce complex economies, the ability to operate as something more than just ourselves as individuals, with all the added benefits that come with that. I am really worried about that. Because if we can't trust each other, we don't believe that the other person even believes in reality or the reality that we perceive,
Mhm.
then there is no society, there is no democracy, there is no point to interacting beyond to destroy the other. And that happens in some countries. It happened in the Soviet Union. They built their system to basically create chaos so that no one knew what was true or not. So you relied on the dictator, the autocrat, the guy in charge of the Communist Party, Lenin, Stalin, Trotsky, whoever else, Brezhnev, who else. But what we have here is a situation where we're latching onto conspiracy theories and snake oil salesmen instead of reality, and that is really, really dangerous for our future.
Yeah. Again, there was so much in your answer there. I think that what I like to talk about a lot, which you've said, is we went from having mostly collective experiences to mostly having individual experiences, right? And this is across the board, right? So, we used to make phone calls, right? That was more synchronous. There was some more back and forth. Obviously, if you're in person, you're having to look somebody in the eye, and there's a humanity there. To let's go to like something like texting, and I know this is not the worst of the worst, where it's a little easier to unload on somebody. They might not see it till later. Like everything's just become so much more disconnected, basically, right? And when you look at something like politics, which is huge, obviously, I tell people, and I think we're of a similar generation, like when I was growing up, it was rude to talk about politics. It was rude to talk about religion, right? Like you could have a conversation with somebody that might be on a different political spectrum and you might not even know it. And now it's just like right out there. And then of course there's the tribalism, right? So if I know that you're part of the different tribe, I'm not even going to talk to you. We might have things in common, right? But so there's this is a really complicated topic, but I kind of go to the collective versus individual, which you covered a lot. And then I go to the kind of rabbit hole effect, I think, which you've spoken to as well, right? Which is we're all in our own echo chambers. We get more and more extreme versions of whatever it is that is reinforcing who we are already. So it makes it really difficult to have any empathy or even listen to the other side, because of the way it feels like it's just so all around us, and add the hateful content on top, right? Talking about the other side. And you just have a recipe for, like you said, individualized like loneliness, basically. And that's really sad. We need people. This is like there's a loneliness epidemic. The US Surgeon General put out an advisory about this a couple of years ago. So, and absolutely, the algorithms are a big part of it. But there's a lot there. But those are the things I wanted to add. I don't know if you had anything else on that topic.
No, I completely agree. Like, and it's so boring. Ugh. When I was young, like we did so many things and politics wasn't involved in it. My best friend growing up was a big fan of Margaret Thatcher, the Conservative, and I was like the other side. And he's still my best friend. I love him more than like any other person on the planet. He's been there with me since I was a kid. And I apart from my daughter and my wife, I should say that officially. So, I do find it stultifying that black and white are the only two colors anymore. And I'm like, well,
no, it is boring.
I'm like, I'm brown. So like, what, I'm brown. Shades of gray, for God's sakes. It makes the world. And it's not just. The funny thing is, one of my things I say is that it's like in between black and white is not shades of gray. It's actually the rainbow.
Yeah.
Of the world. It's what makes the world worth living is complexity and richness and difference. And my wife's from Oklahoma, and one of my things going back, this is going to sound a little bit prejudiced in itself, but sometimes going home, I go and hang out with her family, and someone will say something super, super progressive, and I'll raise an eyebrow quietly and smile at my wife and be like, I'm like, who drank the woke Kool-Aid?
But so funny.
I love how wacky our minds are, how heterogeneous, how complex our belief systems are, because they're based on our individuality, our experiences, the things that happen in our lives. And I think that's what makes a world worth living. And I find the sort of the desiccated black and white, left or right, blue or red debate to be frankly, it's something I don't engage in, and CCH is a non-partisan organization, and I find all of that really boring.
Yeah, and I say this all the time, but not everybody should really probably be talking about politics. Like, do you really know what you're talking about, or are you just regurgitating talking points? Right, back to the being boring. I mean, that's boring as well, right? Like the individual thought just gets stripped away, right? So, so much there. Okay, so can we talk again? We covered this a little bit, political polarization, but can we dig in a little bit more? It is widely documented that algorithms promote misinformation, propaganda, conspiracies, fake news. We've covered this already. And that trains our thoughts and feelings. It can skew our worldview. It can discourage independent thinking. So, a lot of the stuff we were just hinting about just now. So, how does social media fuel political polarization specifically?
So let's say you have a system I'm going to give three different mechanisms that I think are really worth talking about. The first is something that we studied in a report called Malgorithm. So in the pandemic we studied people. So we set up accounts on Instagram and we got them to follow like an anti-Semite account, like an anti-Jewish hate account. And we then went to see what does that account get fed. And what we found it was being fed was kind of COVID conspiracy theories about, like 5G or whatever, and anti-vaccine conspiracy theories. And then we set up an account that was just following anti-vaccine conspiracy theories, and that was being fed anti-Semitism and QAnon. So what you find with these platforms is they cross-fertilize conspiracy theories, and that actually leads to a process of hybridization, we call it, which is where conspiracy theories become mixed up with one another in a really complex way. And so you get this increasingly complex array of conspiracy theories that people have. It's one of the things that when I speak to counterterrorism and countering extremism people in governments all around the world, the US, UK, EU, wherever I speak to, they say the funny thing is most of the people that are committing the most horrendous extremist acts these days, we don't recognize the ideology. It's not one of the ones in our handbook. It's always something completely bananas, in which they believe a wide array of different things. So that's one of the ways in which it promotes misinformation and conspiracy theories and pushes people down rabbit holes, which are ever more sort of complex and difficult to disentangle. The second way that algorithms really change the way that people understand the world around them is because of the way that they feed you more extreme versions of what you already may have stopped or looked at or whatever else. Yeah. And that's it's that repetition, it's the drip of disinformation that eventually recolors the lens through which we see the world. And that's something that's fundamental to our psychology. It's actually one of the most important learning techniques we have is pattern recognition. We look for things that happen frequently. And, you'll remember when your kids were really young and they were starting to learn the world around them. And eventually they worked out that when dad's goes to get a bottle and then put water in and then he scoops stuff in, I remember distinctly the day my daughter realized that when I hold a bottle, food's coming instead of when the food comes. It was that moment because she understood patterns, she understood sequences. And so when we show things to people again and again and again, they start to think that's the way that things are. It's called the illusory truth effect. Frequency is a shortcut in our brain to mean truth. And if you see lies again and again and again, that can really distort the way that you think. A really tragic example is a guy from the board of my organization, Ian Russell, whose daughter Molly took her own life when she was 14. And when a coroner's court investigated what actually happened, they asked Meta and Pinterest to tell them what they had served her. And the conclusion of the investigators was that she'd seen so much content about harming yourself.
Yeah.
It would have been normal for her to conclude that normal people hurt themselves on the outside when they hurt inside. And when they really hurt inside, they kill themselves.
Yeah.
So that's another example. I think that the third way they do that, social media platforms, is that the way they're designed is inherently conflictual. What they're always trying to do is trying to make you ratchet up how aggressive you are, how vile you are, how much you abuse the other side, because what that then gets is the strongest possible reaction from people going, how dare you? So if I said to you, not sure if I like your hair today, you might go, that's rude, but then ignore it. If I said to you, you look terrible today, you know what? I've seen haystacks that look better than your hair does today. You'd go, you can, and you'd have a proper go back, and other people would pile in and go, how dare you talk to Anna? Your hair looks stunning today, by the way. I just want to say, but mine leaves a lot to be desired today. But you know, people would jump in, and so what they're looking for is more extreme reactions, and that's the stuff that gets amplified. So actually, what you get is a ratcheting effect where the perverse incentive is say the worst thing possible, because that way you'll get the most support from your side, the most opposition from the other side. And it's that mix of opposition and some support that actually pushes you up the algorithmic league table, makes you a superstar on social media. And so when people tell me about like this guy's a real superstar on social media, I'm like, oh, I know how he got there.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't consider that a point of pride, to be frank.
Yeah.
I consider that actually a source of shame.
Yeah. And just be clear, what you're talking about is engagement. So people generally are not going to comment on something that's just nice, right? They're going to fight in the comments. And when they fight in the comments, that's going to go way up to the top.
Oh, and you know, the platforms know this, by the way.
Yeah.
And that they've told us, they've shown us charts. Mark Zuckerberg a few years ago published a chart that showed that he on the x-axis, which is x-axis and y-axis. So on one axis it says how bad the content is. It's the term they use is how violative the content is, and on the other axis is engagement, the y-axis. Yeah. And what it shows is that basically, if you say something that isn't violative, you get very low engagement. It's only when you get to the absolute fringes of the most offensive, the content that most clearly violates their rules, that engagement shoots up.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that the platforms tell us. The bad people tell us. Andrew Tate says, keep a third of your followers as haters, because those haters who give you the engagement that shoves you up the algorithmic league table. So, you know, we know this to be true. What's the systemic cultural effect on a society in which the worst possible people get the most exposure?
Yeah.
I think it causes real damage to a society. It corrodes the soul of a society when we no longer listen to the people whose opinions are most worth listening to because they've thought about it, they've come to a way of expressing it, which is almost, which is easy for us to understand, rather than the people who say things which are dumb, reflexive, and actually make us disgusted.
Yeah. Oh, it's so sad when you put it that way. So you mentioned Andrew Tate. So I actually really wanted to ask you about this because I know your group did a story on adolescence.
Yeah.
So I'm talking about the Netflix series Adolescence. Mm-hmm. So this shines a light on incel culture and toxic masculinity, which we touched on earlier too, and how harmful this can be to boys and young men. So can you speak to what's happening in this area on a societal level and what signs parents can look out for in their boys?
So let me just start by saying the show Adolescence was brilliant viewing. It's, I remember putting it on just randomly when I was sitting on my sofa, and then 4 hours later, still sitting there. Every parent knows this. Trying to watch an entire movie is very, very difficult with kids. So I watched for 4 hours and I couldn't turn my eyes away. And that's because it was the most authentic description of the pain that kind of extremism and violence can cause.
Yep.
And every single person, every single parent, every single kid can absolutely sympathize with one of the characters or more of the characters in that show. That said, it wasn't a particularly effective description of incel culture. This is not a great boast, but we have done the biggest ever study of incels. We found the world's biggest incels forum. We downloaded from that forum 1.2 million posts, so an entire year's worth of posts.
Wow.
And then our data scientists used sophisticated AI tools to categorize the kinds of speech and to understand where was the discourse going over that year. Mm-hmm. So what we found was that over that year, and this is really hard to listen to, and I'm sorry, and if anyone doesn't want to listen to anything about sexual violence, you may want to turn away from this for a moment. But what we found was that over the year, they basically were debating whether or not it was okay to rape children. And they decided at the end of the year that it was. And they then changed the rules of the world's biggest incels forum, which used to be that you couldn't sexualize children, to you can sexualize children, but not prepubescent children, so children before they go through puberty. So they concluded, and this is 16,000 men who have decided that it's okay to rape children. And what we found after the adolescents came out was that actually that forum had doubled in size. It's now 30,000 men, each one of whom is a clear and present danger to your child. And I think that that's what's so very, very disturbing, is that the scale of recruitment is amplified at a radical level by digital technology. I was just reading a report today by Counterterrorism on how AI is being used by Islamist terrorist groups right now for recruitment, for proselytization of their hatred, translations into other languages, rapid distribution of their content, tailoring it to particular psychologies. These digital technologies that don't have enough guardrails because they have no concern about them being it's not abuse anymore. It's just the normal use of these platforms by bad people, makes their world a lot easier. And so what we've got is a system where bad actors are able to operate with impunity. The platforms themselves accelerate and make more intense the visibility of the worst possible content. It's driving a radical reshaping of the way that young men think about women. And I think it is stealing from them their ability to have something that is the most precious thing in my life, to be in a relationship that's more than the sum of its parts. I remember the day after I got married is the first time I woke up and I thought, oh God, my life is actually, and I'd been with my wife, we'd been going out for a long time. I just felt different. I felt like I was in something bigger. And you're stealing that from our sons. And I find that profoundly offensive. We're also taking from them their sense of civic virtue. One of my close friends is a former Marine who served 4 tours in Iraq, was blown up a few times, suffered a severe TBI, a traumatic brain injury, came home, and then set up an amazing charity called Creative Vets in Nashville, Tennessee, where he helps connect fellow veterans who've suffered immeasurably in service of their country and their communities and their families and the nation, with musicians who can help them to express their pain, express their vulnerability, and reintegrate. And he and I, this guy's 4 inches taller than I am. I'm 6'1". He's a big guy. And he said to me, I said to him, like, what does it mean to be a man? He said, being a man is being someone who is willing to go out and put your life on the line because you want to protect others' ability to make choices that you wouldn't necessarily agree with, And I remember just sitting there and thinking, holy moly, that is the most selfless thing I've ever heard. But those are the civic virtues on which countries like America were built. They were built on people who understood the nature of sacrifice. And we are, again, stealing that. We're stealing that not just from those boys, but from the communities that they could serve and from the nation itself, which relies on good men who actually try to be something more than just a selfish machine for self-aggrandizement, self-enrichment. So I think, I think of this at both an individual and a societal level as an absolute disaster. And parents have a role to play here. We need to be looking out for signs like disdain for women, for withdrawal, for use of language like alphas, betas, red pill, black pill. So an incel would consider themselves to be black pilled. An extremist would consider themselves to be red pilled. Idolizing violent figures. Look, we spend a lot of time thinking about which kids our kids are spending time with. And we think, well, I don't want you spending time with that kid. That kid's bad news. What about online? Mm-hmm. So which areas are they expressing interest in? And if you see a problem, seek help. We've got a free parents guide on our website, protectingkidsonline.org. And parents can go there and download it for free. And it just gives some hints on what to be looking out for, what we found in our research. and what to do if your kid is showing those signs.
There's just so much in your answer. Again, quick question. Why you mentioned that incel group you were talking about pretty much doubled after the show came out? Why do you think that was? Just people finding awareness of it or community? What
Look, there's this myth that sunlight kills all bad things, kills all pathogens, kills all germs, kills all whatever, and that's not true. As a medic, I can tell you that sunlight often helps some pathogens to breed.
I see.
So what we're seeing there is that actually exposure was driving people to those spaces,
Got
and
it.
you got to treat a disease, a pathogen, with a cure. And what we're not doing at a societal level, and I blame the legislators for this, they need to
Yeah.
get off their rear ends and actually go and legislate. The Kids Online Safety Act,
Yeah.
the AI Accountability and Transparency Act. There's so much that's there, and yet they're not doing anything about it. Every now and then I watch C-SPAN and have a look at what these people are talking about, and I always think, you guys find a lot of time to call each other names. Why can't you actually do something that helps parents with the incredibly difficult and an ever more difficult job of parenting? It's
Yeah.
a job.
Yeah. And then I just wanted to quickly paint the picture too for parents so they can understand how this could happen, because I would imagine most households are not misogynist or sexist or
No.
whatever, but from what I understand, it starts with something like we talked about earlier, right? These platforms know you're a 13, 14-year-old boy. They start to feed you that type of content, or maybe you looked up workouts or something very benign, right? And then that gets you down the rabbit hole where you end up with toxic masculinity content. And you mentioned Andrew Tate. There's so many others, but it's sort of there's pro rape, to be totally frank. I mean, you covered that, but women being possessions, we don't need women, that's sort of the incel side of it. But it's happening earlier than parents think, and I don't think they understand how the boys are getting exposed to it and how it all works. But I'll add a couple things to this in addition to the rabbit hole, because I think about failure to launch a lot. I have a 12-year-old, and Jonathan Haidt said this, but I repeat it all the time, which is video games, they tap into boys' primal instinct for war, right? And then porn taps into boys' primal instinct to procreate, right? So between those things, which are, by the way, taking your time away from developing relationships or learning how to be disappointed or doing all the things you need to do to launch. We could do an hour on failure to launch, but combine that with maybe some toxic masculinity content, and you've got a real recipe for something a very sad outcome, right? At a very young age. So I wanted to add those couple little points in there.
I think about this a lot in terms of social mobility and the parents who are forced because they're working two jobs or whatever else, single moms, single parents whose kids are essentially being looked after by a babysitter, a PlayStation 5, or
Yeah.
social media. And I grew up in a two-parent family, but neither of my parents worked, and I'm the eldest of seven kids. We never had any money. I realized that my way to getting those things, I like conflict. I'm a sports guy. I used to play a lot of team sports. I rowed at Cambridge. I played rugby. I played cricket. I played soccer. And I love competition. I like girls. When I was a 13-year-old, I was an incel. I was involuntarily celibate, which is what that term means, because I was a 13-year-old boy who went to an all-boys school. There wasn't much chance to meet girls. But I realized that my way out was to be fit, to be kind, to develop myself as a human being, to be smart, to be someone that people would want to spend time with, women would want to spend time with.
Yeah.
I wanted to compete, so I got strong. I exercised a lot,
Yeah.
and I didn't drink and didn't do bad things because I wanted to be the best at what I do.
Yeah.
And instead, young boys are now being given quick fixes, and
Yeah.
they're being told, actually, there's other quick fixes. So we've looked at young men who've been presented with images of, like, Chris Evans as Captain America. He looks amazing, right? As Captain America. I'm sure everyone can agree on that. But the problem is that telling every young boy that you can achieve that physique isn't realistic. So that's why these guys then say, hey, by the way, steroids are perfectly normal.
Yeah.
Peptides are perfectly normal. PEDs, SARMs, these are all perfectly normal. And here's ways that you can hide it from your parents, by the way. And
Yeah.
then you just have to buy it from my web shop. So actually young men they're being groomed and exploited by some of the worst human beings out there, but with
Yeah.
the knowing connivance of social media companies run by people who would, as you say, never let their kids be exposed to this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Crazy. You touched on, I think, steroids, right? There was a study that came out, I think it was a year or two ago, that talked about, because body image is typically thought of as a girl's issue, but that it's affecting boys just as much, basically, and it's for all these reasons that we're talking about. But boys are also getting body dysmorphia and body image issues for the same reasons, and steroids is a part of this.
The transition to adulthood, 14 to 24, are the toughest years of your life. It's where you stop being socialized by your parents and you start being socialized by your peer group. And you're trying to work out where you fit into the world. And that is inherently a traumatic process for a lot of kids. And so, young men are trying to work out what is good enough, like who do I want to be as a person, and what they're actually being fed is unrealistic beliefs in what they can attain. Whether it's Andrew Tate telling them you can have a Maserati and a Rolls Royce and a private jet if you just treat women like pieces of meat and exploit them, because what Andrew Tate does is exploit women, specifically force them to be on campsites and perform pornographically for other men for his economic benefit. And he talks about that and boasts about it. Or they're being told by these influencers on social media, on Instagram, that you can have a body like this. All you've got to do, like that Liver King guy who's like, all you got to do is eat liver and buy my supplements. And actually he's taking fistfuls of steroids.
Yeah.
It's all nonsensical. And what we're doing is allowing young men to be exposed to pressures that would, of course, they give them body dysmorphia. Of course, it devastates them. And they give up because they feel they can never be good enough, because you got to do all these things at once. You got to have, I work all day. I'm a workaholic, and I'm also a 46-year-old father. So like, I have a dad bod. I'm never going to have a six pack again. I'm never going to see those glorious abs again. It's not like when it's not rowing Imran at Cambridge. This is fat dad Imran. And I'm calm with that. But young men are being told, no, you're a failure. And that's really sucks for them, because they'll never be happy.
And not to mention, you're already vulnerable at that age. Like, you and I are the same age. And I remember being uncomfortable with my own body or who I was. I mean, that's like just part of being an adolescent, right? So it's one thing for you to see that type of content. It's a whole other thing for a 14, 15, 16-year-old boy to see that type of content, right? Because you're already not feeling great about yourself. That's just the nature of growing up.
And I don't need to make this point too emphatically, but it's even harder for minorities, even harder for Black and Asian kids, for Hispanic kids, for LGBTQ plus kids, for kids who may have a disability.
Yeah.
Like, what it's like for them to be told that you're basically never ever going to measure up to what it means to be a successful human being.
Yeah.
Imagine if someone told Stephen Hawking that.
Yeah.
Who lived around the corner from my college in Cambridge and became the greatest physicist in modern times. Think about all those people who succeeded and were encouraged to succeed, were encouraged to believe that you can be anything you want, and they're in fact being told now you're never going to be good enough. Again, that sucks. And that's why Mark Zuckerberg won't let his 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds go on there, because he doesn't want them exposed to that kind of pressure. He wants to allow them to flourish and become the person that they deserve to be, the person they want to be, rather than that they're being told by an algorithm that's designed to addict them that they should be.
Yeah. I've taken so much of your time, but can I ask you one more thing? And I think it's a quick one. So with everything you know so much about how social media actually works. I'm so impressed with that, to spread hateful and harmful content. So do you think it's a safe and healthy place for kids and teens? Loaded question.
No, of course not. And look, I remember once I was once on a phone call with some senators and congressmen and a senior executive from an unnamed social media company. And I said to him, you know, what would make things a lot easier is if you just put a big warning at the top of your site. This is
Yeah.
for entertainment. Do not believe anything you read here because it's probably BS. And he laughed and he said, that's a great idea. And then everyone else raised their eyebrows and went, so will you do it? And he was like, no, well, of course not. It'd be too difficult. But, I just think I thought to myself, aha, you've given yourself away, haven't you, son? And I think that that's the problem, is that these platforms are not safe for kids. I'm working really, really hard. My organization does the research. We have offices in Brussels, London, LA, DC. We're trying to persuade lawmakers all over the world to at least create the transparency so that we know how these platforms work, so we can inform ourselves and we can make informed decisions about whether or not
Yeah.
we want our kids to be on there, to have more controls so that people actually can control their experience a bit more, can make sure that if you want to, you can have a diversity of opinion so you can see what people think. That actually we want to have more accountability and more, and if they kill kids, then they should be held economically responsible.
Yeah.
Like if you went to a deli in New York and you ate a sandwich and it killed you because they were negligent, that deli would be out of business. How come companies that kill our kids and feed our kids with eating disorders, self-harm, with toxic ideas, that they're able to get away with it every day? It's us as parents that have to deal with it. So until they start to show some responsibility, which they're not going to do without intervention, then I would say it's a pretty unhealthy place to have your kids. But if you're going to let your kids experience it, and eventually they will experience it, then start early, have those conversations.
Yeah.
Please tell them that the first thing you should say is, I'm never, ever, ever going to have a go at you for what you see on those platforms. But I want to have the chance to understand it, and I want to have the chance to tell you what I think, and give you some context and the benefit of my experience.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, because back to what we said earlier, at the end of the day, you're not going to be able to control it and you're not going to be able to manage it. It's too much work. What parent can do that? Scroll through everything that their kids are experiencing. And even if you did, it comes and goes, right? So you just won't know. So great advice. I love it. Thank you so much for your time. I am so impressed with everything your org is doing. And this topic, I think, is, in my experience dealing with parents, is probably the least understood, I think, out of all of them. So thank you so much for shining a light on it and explaining everything so thoroughly. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.